The path to success is not always about having good qualities, and these people have proved that you don't have to be in a corporate office or Silicon Valley to make billions. But in the shadows, here are the top 10 richest criminals of all time. Robin Hood of the Paisa. Sitting at the top of this list is a man who was so wealthy that he spent $2,500 every week on rubber bands to tie up his money. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was born on December 1, 1949 in Rio Negro, Colombia, to a poor farmer and a school teacher. He grew up in Medellin, where he showed an early interest in politics and entrepreneurship. Escobar dreamed of becoming the president of Colombia someday, but also had a knack for crime. As a teenager, he started his criminal career by selling fake diplomas, falsifying report cards, stealing cars, and smuggling stereo equipment. He also got involved in kidnapping and holding people for ransom. In the early 1970s, Escobar discovered the lucrative business of cocaine, which was becoming popular in the United States and Europe. He began to work for various drug smugglers, buying coca paste from Peru and Bolivia, refining it into powder cocaine, and transporting it across borders. He soon established his network of contacts and routes, and in 1976, he founded the Medellin cartel, along with his cousin Gustavo Gaviria and other associates. By the mid-1980s, Escobar's cartel was responsible for 80% of the cocaine that entered the United States, making him one of the wealthiest people in the world. He was able to smuggle up to 70 to 80 tons of cocaine every week using planes, boats, cars, and even submarines. He also bribed or threatened officials, judges, and police officers to ensure his operations ran smoothly.
He knew all about the families of the police. He knew where their mothers, their fathers lived, and how many brothers they had.
He knew all about the families of the police. He knew where their mothers and their fathers lived and how many brothers they had. Escobar was pulling in about $420 million in revenue weekly and amassed a net worth of $30 billion, making him one of the richest people in the world. He was so wealthy that he burned $2 million to keep his daughter warm enough when they had escaped a capture attempt. Lord of the Skies. Legend has it that Amado Carrillo Fuentes left his small village in Sinaloa, Mexico around age 12, telling people, "I won't come back until I'm rich." He kept his word and built a multi-billion-dollar drug empire. He joined his uncle's organization and learned the ropes of drug trafficking. He moved to Chihuahua, where he befriended Rafael Aguilar Guajardo, the boss of the Juarez cartel. He also established connections with Pablo Escobar and the Cali cartel in Colombia, the major suppliers of cocaine in the world. In 1993, Carrillo made his move to take over the Juarez cartel. He assassinated Aguilar, his former friend and mentor, and became the new leader. He expanded his operations and territory, reaching Central America and Europe, and invested in a large fleet of planes, including 22 private Boeing 727 jets that he used to transport cocaine across the border. This earned him the nickname El Señor de los Cielos, which meant Lord of the Skies, as he used his planes to smuggle cocaine. He bribed and intimidated officials, politicians, and rivals to protect his empire. He also laundered money through Colombia and other countries. He was estimated to have a net worth of over $25 billion, making him one of the wealthiest men in the world. As his power grew, however, so did scrutiny from Mexican and U.S. officials. Carrillo was aware of the pressure and decided to change his appearance. He underwent facial plastic surgery and abdominal surgery liposuction in a hospital in Mexico City on July 4, 1997. However, something went wrong during the procedure. Carrillo died in his recovery room, allegedly due to complications or a drug overdose. His body was quickly taken away by his henchmen and flown back to his country. El Chapo Guzman. He was once the most wanted man in the world, a ruthless and cunning leader of a multi-billion-dollar criminal empire that spanned continents and decades. He was Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the infamous drug lord who escaped from prison twice and evaded capture for years. Guzman was born in a poor and remote area of Sinaloa, Mexico in the mid-1950s. He entered the drug trade through his father, who grew marijuana for local dealers. He quickly rose through the ranks of the Guadalajara cartel, the dominant drug trafficking organization in Mexico in the 1980s, headed by Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo. He proved to be a loyal and efficient worker, helping to transport drugs across the border and managing logistics and distribution. He earned the nickname El Rapido, which meant speedy for his ability to move drugs quickly and evade detection. In the mid-1980s, the Guadalajara cartel split into several factions after the arrest of Felix Gallardo. El Chapo became one of the leaders of the Sinaloa cartel, along with Hector El Güero Palma, Ismael El Mayo Zambada, and Juan Jose El Azul Esparragoza. He expanded his operations, producing and smuggling cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and marijuana. He also developed innovative and sophisticated methods of transporting drugs, such as building tunnels under the border, hiding drugs in cans, trucks, and planes, and using catapults and drones. He established contacts and alliances with other drug traffickers, such as Pablo Escobar in Colombia, and corrupted officials, police, and military in Mexico and other countries. He became known as El Chapo for his short stature, but also as one of the most ruthless drug lords in the world. His organization earned billions of dollars in profits, making him one of the wealthiest men in the world. According to Forbes, he had a net worth of $1 billion in 2009 and ranked as one of the most influential people in the world in 2013. However, his reign of terror also made him a target of law enforcement agencies in both Mexico and the United States, who offered millions of dollars in rewards for his capture. He was arrested in Guatemala in 1993, but escaped from a maximum security prison in Mexico in 2001 with the help of corrupt guards. He was recaptured in 2014 but escaped again in 2015 through a tunnel dug under his cell. In 2016, he was arrested after a fierce shootout with the police in his hideout in Los Mochis, Sinaloa. In 2017, Guzman was extradited to the United States, where he faced multiple charges of drug trafficking, murder, money laundering, and weapons offenses. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole plus 30 years. He also had to forfeit more than $12.6 billion, the estimated amount of his drug profits. Queen of Mean.
Your lawyer described you as a tough bitch.
Well, I think what he was trying to do was to say she's a tough bitch.
This woman was so cruel that she cut off her grandchildren from her inheritance and left $12 million for her dog Trouble and billions of dollars for charity. She was also notorious for her cruelty towards her employees, contractors, and tax authorities, which earned her the nickname the Queen of Mean. Her lavish lifestyle, legal troubles, and controversy made her one of the most infamous figures in American history. Leona Hemsley was born as Lena Mindy Rosenthal in 1920 to Polish Jewish immigrants. She dropped out of college to pursue a career as a model, but soon married and divorced twice. She then entered the real estate business, where she gained a reputation for selling high-end apartments in Manhattan. In 1968, she met Harry Hemsley, a married real estate tycoon who owned iconic buildings like the Empire State Building and the Flatiron Building. Leona became his partner in both business and life. They married in 1972 after Harry divorced his wife of 33 years. Leona took charge of the Hemsley hotel chain, which included the Hemsley Palace, the Park Lane, and the New York Hemsley. She portrayed herself as a successful and assertive queen who expected nothing but the best from her staff and guests. She appeared in advertisements with slogans like, "It's the only place in the world where the queen stands guard," and "When you're at the Hemsley Palace, you're one of the family." The Hemsley family. She faced criticism and resentment from her employees, contractors, and competitors who accused her of being abusive, dishonest, and greedy. She was known for firing people on a whim, berating them for minor mistakes, and refusing to pay them for their work. She once said, "We don't pay taxes, only the little people pay taxes," which became a famous quote that epitomized her arrogance and disdain for the law. Of course, she denied saying this statement.
We pay $344 million in taxes. Of course I didn't say it.
In 1988, she was indicted on charges of tax evasion, mail fraud, and conspiracy, along with Harry and 2 of their associates.
I am not going to jail. I've done nothing wrong. I have done nothing wrong. I'm innocent. My only crime is that I'm Leona Helmsley.
The charges stemmed from allegations that they had billed their expenses, such as renovations of their homes, to their business accounts, and had filed false tax returns to avoid paying millions of dollars in taxes. She also had a conflict with her family, especially her son Jay, who died of a heart attack in 1982, and his widow and children, whom she disinherited and sued. Prince Prosperous. No government can prevent death and destruction when a band of teenage boys picks up arms and forms a private militia.
But like the beautiful red poppies that grow in his fields, Khun Sa is not what he appears. He is a father whose trade kills children, a monarch who cries freedom, a drug dealer who builds schools, a man who holds much of America captive.
Khun Sa was a notorious drug lord and warlord who ruled over the Golden Triangle, a region in Southeast Asia where Burma, Thailand, and Laos converge, and where most of the world's opium and heroin were produced in the 20th century. Khun was born in 1934 to a Chinese father and a Shan mother and grew up in a remote village in Shan State, plagued by ethnic conflicts and civil wars for decades. Khun received no formal education but learned how to fight and trade opium from the Kuomintang, the Chinese nationalist forces who fled to Burma after losing the civil war to the communists in 1949. In 1976, Khun Sa, whose real name was Chang Chi-fu, adopted the Shan name meaning Prince Prosperous when he claimed to be the leader of the Shan United Army, a rebel group that fought for the independence of Shan State from the Burmese military junta.
When you're talking about Khun Sa, he's not a wanted man at all. Nobody really wants him. I mean, he's a friend with everybody. He's the most wanted man I ever heard of.
However, his real motive was to control the lucrative opium trade, which he used to finance his private army of thousands of men and to buy weapons, vehicles, and luxury goods. He had a network of about $5 billion and built a sprawling headquarters in Homong, a valley near the Thai border, where he lived like a king, surrounded by mistresses, bodyguards, and satellite dishes. He also cultivated a public image of a benevolent leader who built roads, schools, and hospitals for the local people, and offered to end the opium trade in exchange for international recognition and aid for Shan State. He was responsible for supplying up to 60% of the heroin in the United States, and for causing countless deaths and addictions around the world. Several governments, including the US, offered a $2 million reward for his capture. He was also involved in several battles and skirmishes with the Burmese and Thai armies and rival warlords who tried to challenge his dominance in the Golden Triangle. He was a cunning and charismatic leader who managed to evade and outsmart his enemies and often negotiated with them for his benefit. Khun Sa's reign ended in 1996 when he surrendered to the Burmese government after losing the support of his allies and facing increased pressure from the international community. He disbanded his army and handed over his weapons in return for amnesty and protection from extradition. He moved to Yangon, the capital of Burma, where he lived in seclusion and engaged in legitimate business ventures such as mining and construction. Henry Ford of cocaine.
He was really the Henry Ford of drug smuggling. He turned it into a very serious business.
If you were going to make up a bad guy, Carlos Leder, you couldn't make up a better bad guy than him.
This man was the madman who revolutionized cocaine trafficking in Colombia. Carlos Enrique Leder Rivas was a notorious drug lord who co-founded the Medellin cartel, one of the most violent criminal organizations in history. He was born in 1949 in Armenia, Colombia, to a German father and a Colombian mother. He moved to the United States in his teens, where he started smuggling stolen cars and marijuana. In prison, he met George Young, a former marijuana dealer who introduced him to the lucrative business of cocaine trafficking. Young had experience flying marijuana to the U.S. from Mexico in small aircraft, staying below radar level and landing on dry lake beds. Inspired by the idea, Leder decided to apply the method to cocaine transport and formed a partnership with Young. Leder's ultimate scheme was to revolutionize the cocaine trade by transporting the drug to the United States using small aircraft. After they were released from prison on parole, they established a network of planes that flew cocaine from Colombia to the United States, making millions of dollars in the process. Leder was an ambitious and ruthless man who sidelined Young and expanded his operations. He bought a small island in the Bahamas, Norman's Cay, where he built a private airstrip and a fortress. He bribed and intimidated the local authorities and residents, turning the island into his cocaine paradise. Leder spent about $4.5 million on the island, furnishing it to his taste. He shipped tons of cocaine to the United States, supplying up to 80% of the market in the 1980s. At the peak of his criminal career, he was worth about $2.7 billion. Leder lived lavishly, throwing extravagant parties, collecting luxury cars, and dating beautiful women. He also became involved in politics, founding a neo-Nazi party and opposing the extradition treaty between Colombia and the United States. However, his empire began to crumble when the United States and the Bahamas launched a crackdown on his operations in Norman's Cay in 1982. He fled to Colombia, where he joined forces with other drug lords, such as Pablo Escobar, to form the Medellin cartel. The cartel waged a bloody war against the Colombian government, the police, the judiciary, and the rival Cali cartel. They also kidnapped, tortured, and killed hundreds of people, including journalists, politicians, judges, and civilians. Leder was one of the most violent and erratic members of the cartel, who advocated for extreme measures, such as bombing the U.S. Embassy and assassinating presidential candidates. Leder's downfall came in 1987, when the Colombian police captured him in a raid on his jungle hideout. He was extradited to the United States, where he was tried and convicted of drug trafficking, racketeering, and conspiracy. Black Widow.
He was there before Pablo Escobar on a much larger scale. Pablo Escobar was stealing cars when she was already trafficking 3,400 pounds of cocaine in the 70s and 80s.
Griselda Blanco was one of the most powerful figures in the history of the cocaine trade. She rose from a life of poverty and crime in Colombia to become the leader of a vast drug empire that spanned from New York to Miami in the 1970s and 1980s. She ruled over a male-dominated and merciless realm of narcotics and brutality.
She was the largest importer at the time.
She basically invented bringing from South America and into the United States.
In 1964, she illegally immigrated to the United States with false passports and settled in Queens, New York, with her 3 children and husband. There, she established a sizable cocaine enterprise. Her return coincided with the onset of public violent conflicts, marked by a surge in crime and hundreds of murders that swept the city of Miami during the 1980s. Her relocation to the United States in the 1970s saw the establishment of a cocaine empire spanning New York, Miami, and Los Angeles. She clashed with the Medellin cartel, led by Pablo Escobar, and orchestrated the importation of tons of cocaine from Colombia. She was known for her ruthless reputation, overseeing numerous murders and assassinations. Her brutality and extravagant lifestyle became infamous, along with innovative smuggling methods such as concealing cocaine in lingerie, dolls, and even human corpses.
They were creating garments. These garments would allow for the drugs to be more smooth around the body. It would just look like a woman's natural figure.
She was responsible for hundreds, if not thousands, of murders and amassed a fortune estimated at over $2 billion. She was feared and respected by her rivals and associates, and earned nicknames like the Black Widow, the Godmother, and the Queen of Cocaine. However, Blanco's reign of terror came to an end when she was arrested in 1985 by the Drug Enforcement Administration in a sting operation. She was extradited to the United States and sentenced to 60 years in prison for drug trafficking and 3 counts of second-degree murder. She spent almost 2 decades behind bars. Scarface.
In the 1930s, Al Capone bribed news reporters to avoid his mother finding out he was a gangster.
Al Capone was one of the most notorious gangsters in American history. He dominated the organized crime scene in Chicago during the Prohibition era, making millions of dollars from illegal activities such as bootlegging, gambling, prostitution, racketeering, and murder. Capone's criminal career began in New York, where he joined the 5 Points gang as a teenager and worked as a bouncer and bodyguard for mobster Johnny Torrio. In 1919, he followed Torrio to Chicago, where he became his right-hand man and eventually his successor as the boss of the Chicago outfit. Capone expanded the gang's territory and influence, bribing politicians and police officers and waging war against rival gangs, such as the North Side Gang. He was nicknamed Scarface by the media because of the 3 scars on his left cheek, which he received in a fight when he was a teenager. Capone's wealth and power reached an all-time high in the late 1920s when he was estimated to earn $100 million yearly, equivalent to nearly $1.5 billion today. He lived a lavish lifestyle, owning several properties, cars, and jewelry, and spending generously on entertainment, charity, and his family. He was also a popular figure among the public, who saw him as a modern-day Robin Hood.
This guy we're taking out, he's a real bad dude, huh? Nah, he owns a charity. That's the money we're getting. But it's one of those kind of poorly run charities, right? Where a lot of the funds kind of end up in... No, it's one war.
However, Capone's reign of crime was not without consequences. He was widely assumed to have been responsible for ordering the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929, in which he ordered the killing of 7 members of the North Side Gang. This event tarnished his reputation and made him a target of federal authorities, who pursued him for tax evasion. In 1931, he was convicted and sentenced to 11 years in prison. He served most of his time in Alcatraz, where he suffered from the effects of neurosyphilis, which he had contracted in his youth. He was released in 1939, but his health and mental state had deteriorated. He died in 1947 at the age of 48 in his Florida mansion. Harlem's Mr. Untouchable. He was Nicky Barnes, the king of Harlem, the master of heroin, the legend of crime. He was Mr. Untouchable until he touched the wrong people. He was born Leroy Nicholas Barnes, but everyone called him Nicky. He grew up in Harlem, a poor and violent neighborhood in New York City. He hated his abusive, alcoholic father, who beat him and his mother. He dropped out of school and started selling drugs to make money. He soon became addicted to heroin, the most popular and deadly drug on the streets. He spent some time in prison, where he met Joe Gallo, a mafia boss who taught him how to run a drug trafficking organization. He also met Matthew Madonna, a heroin dealer who became his partner. When he got out, he formed the Council, a 7-man syndicate that controlled the heroin trade in Harlem. He imported high-quality heroin from Southeast Asia and sold it at low prices. He made millions of dollars and spent them on fancy cars, clothes, jewelry, and women. He was admired and feared by his peers and respected by the Italian mafia. He was untouchable. He was so confident in his power that he posed for the cover of the New York Times Magazine in 1979 with the headline, Mr. Untouchable. But Barnes also made many enemies in law enforcement and the underworld. He was targeted by the DEA, the FBI, and the NYPD, who tried to bring him down. He was also challenged by rival drug dealers who wanted a piece of his territory. He became paranoid and violent, ordering hits on anyone who crossed him. He thought he was invincible, but he was wrong. His arrogance angered President Jimmy Carter, who ordered his prosecution. He was arrested and sentenced to life in prison without parole. He felt betrayed by his associates, who took over his business and slept with his wife. Fueled by revenge, he cooperated with the government, testified against his former friends, and brought down the council and dozens of other criminals. The master of deception.
As they loaded the van, I thought to myself, that's it. I could pose as a pilot. I could travel all over the world for free. One moment, and the clerk came on and said, yes, sir, maybe you can help me. My name is John Black. I'm a co-pilot with the company based out of San Francisco.
You're one of the greatest con men of all time. You're the daddy of them all.
Frank Abagnale Jr. is one of the most notorious con artists in history. He forged and scammed his way to millions of dollars, impersonated various professionals, and eluded the authorities for years. His life story inspired the movie Catch Me If You Can, starring Leonardo DiCaprio. How much of his story is true, and how did he become a master of deception? Frank Abagnale Jr. was born in the Bronx, New York on April 27, 1948. His parents divorced when he was 15, and he moved with his father to Mount Vernon, New York. His first victim was his father, who gave him a gasoline credit card and a truck, and later received a bill for $3,400. He also claims that he was sent to a reform school run by Catholic Charities USA, from which he escaped by posing as an undercover inspector. Abagnale began his career as a con man by forging checks and creating fake identities. He claims that he impersonated a Pan American World Airways pilot, a hospital physician, a lawyer, a college professor, and an assistant state attorney general. He also claims that he flew over 2 million air miles by deadheading or hitching free rides on flights, and cashed over $2.5 million worth of bad checks in 26 countries. Abagnale was eventually arrested in France in 1969 while posing as a Hollywood screenwriter and extradited to Sweden, where he served 4 months in prison. He was deported to the United States, where he faced multiple charges of fraud and forgery. He claims that he escaped from a federal prison in Atlanta by posing as an undercover agent and was recaptured by the FBI 4 months later. He was captured 3 times, but escaped the first 2 times by tricking the authorities. In 1974, he was released after serving about 5 years in prison, on the condition that he would work alongside the FBI to investigate crimes similar to those that he had committed. With a net worth of $10 million, he started his own company, Abagnale & Associates, which provides security and fraud prevention services.